Good day. Welcome to the first lecture on medieval philosophy. Yes, you've heard it right. It's not medieval, it's medieval. To begin this lecture, I'd like us to look into the term of which the course is named after. We are already familiar with the Greek nature of the word philosophy as a pursuit for wisdom or for truth. And now we actually have the word medieval. The word medieval means in between. And because it technically means in between, it becomes obvious that this period is actually in between the ancient and modern philosophy. As such, the understanding of the term medieval as in-betweenness is rather a consequence of modernity, which means that this period was arrived at, developed, if you will, only during the modern period. But what is more interesting is the fact that medieval philosophy carries within it a lot of problematics. If philosophy is a pursuit for truth, to what extent can it be Christian? If the pursuit of truth is supposed to be universal, then it need not refer to anything specific. And for that matter, to call something Christian is somehow specific. And therefore, how can something specific be referred to concretely? To answer that question, we've opened this course with the Gifford lecture of a very well-known medieval scholar, Etienne Gilson. And Gilson is the person we will have to look at and focus on more specifically. Let's look at the beginning of these lectures. And here we have the concept of medieval philosophy. Sorry, I moved it too fast. And I'd like us to talk about the problem of Christian philosophy. So, Gilson would say, it would be hard to imagine any expression more naturally apt to occur to the mind of the historian of medieval thought than Christian philosophy. But it raises some difficulty, he says, and when we come to reflect about it, few turn out to be so obscure and so hard to define. For the question is not simply whether the historian of medieval thought is justified in considering separately first those philosophies elaborated in the course of the Middle Ages by Christians, and then those constructed by Jews or Muslims. If we put it in that form, the problem is purely historical and therefore can be settled easily. But we have no right to isolate in our history things that in fact were united in reality. Christian thought, Jewish thought, and even Islamic thought, no, acted and reacted on each other, and it would not be at all satisfactory to study them and so many as closed and isolated systems. And therefore, we need to take into consideration what do we really mean by that? Is that really the question? And Jason says the real problem is quite a different one. It belongs to the philosophical order and is much more serious. Reduced to its simplest terms, it consists in asking whether the very concept of Christian philosophy has any real meaning. And then, as a subsidiary matter, whether there was ever any corresponding reality. So that when we ask ourselves, what do we basically mean by Christian philosophy? Do we really mean something when we talk about Christian philosophy? And that's really the question we are confronted with. Yes, eventually, as we move through the course, we will meet Jewish thinkers, Moses Maimonides. We will actually encounter the other thinkers, Al-Farabi, uh, Avicenna, Averroes, or Ibn Rose, Ibn Sena, which are Muslim philosophers. But most of our philosophizing will revolve around religion in the medieval civilization and try to understand how these actually affect scholasticism, or even better yet, s- scholasticism. No? So whether this is Jewish, Islamic, Christian, do they really deserve the name of philosophies? Can we say that Jewish philosophy is a philosophy, or Islamic philosophy is a philosophy? And we have to take note of all the scholasticism. Christian Catholic scholasticism even came in last. Yes, we were the last scholasticism. We were never the first. Um, as our scholasticism will only come uh, at the at about 1000s, or even 1100s for that matter. So it encounters, therefore, in the first place, Jason, the criticism of historians who, without discussing a priori whether a Christian philosophy is possible or not, are clear at any rate that even in the Middle Ages, there never was one, in fact. Um, Shreds of Greek thought, clumsily patching up theology, is about all the Christian thinkers have left us. Sometimes they borrow from Plato, sometimes Aristotle. So some understands medieval philosophy as the mere patching up with theology. Um, Sometimes these thinkers simply borrowed from Plato, sometimes from Aristotle. That is to say, when they are not engaged on something considerably worse, an impossible synthesis of Plato and Aristotle in an effort to reconcile the dead who never cease to differ when alive. And so some historians would even say, never do we meet with a genuine impulse of thought which at one and the same time is thoroughly Christian and really creative. And it follows that Christianity has contributed nothing to the philosophic heritage of humanity. But Gilson will also explain, if the historians state the fact that philosophers go on to add the reason, if no Christian philosophy has appeared on the stage of history, that is because the very concept of a Christian philosophy is contradictory and impossible. In the front rank of those who share this opinion, we must put those whom we may call the pure rationalists, whose position would hardly need description were it not that its influence is a good deal more widespread than we usually think. These people maintain that religion and philosophy are so essentially different that no collaboration between the two is possible at all. They are very far from agreement as to what constitutes the essence of religion, but all agree in affirming that it does not belong to the order of reason, and that reason is quite independent of religion. Now, the order of reason is that of philosophy and therefore is essentially independent from revelation. That's why there's this school that would say uh, that to speak of Christian philosophy is absurd and the expression should be simply discarded or ignored. Of course, here we would find no single neo-scholastic philosopher who would admit an absence of all relation between philosophy and religion, faith and reason. But we should deceive ourselves if we suppose that all neo-scholastics are in absolute position to the rationalist position as just described. On the contrary, some would expressly maintain certain necessary relations on another plane, and there are those among us who would admit the premises of the rationalist argument, and some who would even have the hardihood to accept the conclusion. What these neo-scholastics would certainly deny is that no Christian has ever successfully constructed a philosophy, for these people maintain that Thomas Aquinas actually founded one. But it does not require much pressure to extract the admission that his philosophy is the only example, and that if it is the only example, it is precisely because it stands alone in being constructed on a purely rational basis. Thus, it is rather on facts, that on principles that they disagree with the rationalists, or if there is any difference or principle, it is not concerned with the concept of philosophy, but with the place it occupies in the hierarchy of sciences. So while the pure rationalist puts philosophy in the highest place and identifies it with wisdom, the neo-scholastic subordinates it to theology, which alone, as he holds fully, deserves that name. But is that really even possible? Can we basically say that theology, or uh, when thus subordinated to theology, philosophy remains precisely the same nature as any other that recognizes no wisdom higher than itself? So, if we could ask the medieval thinkers by what right they call themselves philosophers, we will therefore obtain different answers, very different answers. Some, without doubt, would reply that they felt no interest in the title at all. They would be quite content with that of Christian, or what better one could possibly have. Here we might cite such resolute opponents of dialectics as Bernard or even St. Peter Damian. But even if we put aside such extreme cases, we should find hardly any save the Averroists who would admit the legitimacy of an exercise of reason that would be purely philosophical and systematically withdrawn from the influence of faith. The normal view, as expressed in the 12th and 13th century, would be represented by Anselm and Bonaventure, who for the rest would justly claim descendants of Augustine. So, and this is really the path that we will take in this course, no? We will actually look or try to consider how this understanding of Christian philosophy developed, no? Here, this tradition would certainly regard an exercise of pure reason as a possibility after Plato and Aristotle, but would view the matter not so much from the standpoint of the mere definition of reason as from the actual conditions of fact under which it has to work. Now, if it is a fact that between ourselves and the Greeks, the Christian revelation has intervened and has profoundly modified the conditions under which reason has to work, once you are in possession of the revelation, how can you possibly philosophize as though you have never heard of it? The errors of Plato and Aristotle, says Gilson, and we continue reading, are precisely the errors into which pure reason falls, and every philosophy which sets out to be self-sufficing will fall into them again, or perhaps into others still worse. So that henceforth the only safe plan is to take revelation for our guide and make an effort to understand its contents. And this understanding of the contents of revelation will be philosophy itself. Fides, querens, intellectum. That is the basic principle of all medieval speculation. But Gison raises another question. He says, is this not a mere confusion of philosophy with theology? should we problematize philosophizing with theology? No? To avoid the danger, it is very important to consider that the Middle Ages could boast of no philosophy really worthy of the name, save perhaps those created by Thomas Aquinas, Anselm of Canterbury, and even Bonaventure, but only in engagement with their faith. Only with engagement with their faith. The rest of the essay, it's still a very long essay because this is 20 pages long. I'll leave to you to consider and reflect on. Is there really a Christian philosophy? Or maybe, what do we basically mean by Christian philosophy? Can we really engage truth from the perspective of our own philosophizing? This leads me to the PowerPoint for today's lecture and the issue between reason and Christian faith. The medieval philosophy engages this. Yes, it does engages this. And to ignore that medieval philosophy is about reason and faith and the interplay between the two is to ignore also the context of these thinkers. There are two approaches to medieval philosophy, as you will also see as we move forward in the following stages. The first part will take into consideration a topographical perspective where we will reflect, look into even some of the thinkers in ancient philosophy, many of which we will not be able to have enough time to work on due to limited time. No, I only have more or less few weeks. But some thinkers, we will do some deep diving or archaeological perspectives. And by that, we will take into consideration more in depth, in an in-depth manner, the works of Augustine's, especially his Confessions. We will look into Anselm of Canterbury's Proslogion, and we will look some of the beginning of the uh, Summa Theologiae of Thomas Aquinas, and even his proof to God's existence. In that case, we will do an archaeological perspective. This distinction between the topographical and archaeological is very much akin also to the distinction between the Tanaw and sisid at tanaw for Padre Roque, no? Tanaw means overview, lalim, sisid is the deep dive, which is very much akin to the archaeological perspective where we will look at the details more clearly and see also nuances in the reading of the texts. These two dimensions are very important because in the interest or in the absence of time, it's very important to pay attention at the topographical as well as the archaeological changes that happened during the medieval period. For today's session, aside from the reading from Etienne Gilson's Spirit of Medieval Philosophy, which is downloadable anyway, we hope to understand and articulate the relationship between Christian faith and philosophical thinking, especially in their historical encounter. We hope to also evaluate the implications of these historical encounter within our own contexts. Let's begin with philosophy and Christian faith. First, it's worth noting that Christianity will remain to be Christianity with or without philosophy. In the same way that it can also be said that philosophy will remain to be philosophy with or without Christianity. That's the reason why the encounter between philosophy and Christian faith is a rather contingent encounter. What do we mean when we say contingent encounter? By contingent encounter, we mean it need not happen, which means it's possible that philosophy and Christian faith need not have encountered each other, but they encountered each other. But it happened. That's the point. No? Yes, it need not be. No? They need not have encountered each other, but it happened. And because it happened, it took a different turn, something that we can no longer ignore at this point. So it may not have happened. Philosophy and Christian faith did not have encountered each other, no? Take note that for a certain time, Christian disciples were in fact very purists. We can even hear gospel proclamations that says that Jesus was sent out only to the lost tribe of Israel and therefore not to the Gentiles. But it was precisely due to the missionary zeal of St. Paul and the prevailing context and cultures of the cities surrounding Israel and leading to Rome, no? The interestingly Ionian territories, that the question of truth, philosophy, met truth himself, Christ. And that's what happened in the encounter. No? We can recall more specifically the instance when Paul, for example, encountered Saint Paul would go to the Athenians and would look for the altar of the and would recognize the altar for the with of the unnamed God. No, the Greeks were so siguristas. They wanted to have an altar dedicated to all the gods, so that in the advent that one god steps out of Olympus and finds himself in the Athenian city and looks for his altar, and there's no altar dedicated to him because he's not yet known. The Athenians made an altar for the unnamed god, and the altar for the unnamed god is actually what Paul utilized to push forward his claims. That's the reason he says, what you consider to be unnamed, we have a name for him, Jesus Christ. And that's basically the encounter, one of the first encounters between philosophy and the Christian faith. Of course, what happened during that time with Paul is not the singular encounter between Christianity and philosophy, no? As Paul was not the only disciple during that time. And in fact, we will see many manifestations, expressions of this encounter between the Greek philosophical traditions of that time with the Christian faith, in even in the scriptures, in the letters of Paul to the Corinthians, to the Colossians, we will see it in the letter to the Hebrews, or even in the evangelical gospels in John, for example. So, what is worth taking note there, no? In that encounter, first things first, it's worth saying that it need not happen. Christian revelation will still remain to be Christian revelation with or without philosophy. In the same way that philosophy will remain philosophy without Christian faith. But it happened. It need not happen, but it happened. And because it happened, all of a sudden, the merging between philosophy and Christian faith almost already becomes a necessity. And because of that, something inevitable. So Judeo-Christian faith, in a way, no, because of this encounter, Judeo-Christian faith provides a way of understanding the world that is fundamentally a response to a call. No? Remember, Christianity is not an answer to a question. Instead, it is a response to an invitation. On the other hand, philosophy, understood as a search for wisdom, is characterized by posing questions on the meaning of life and specifically finding answers in them. These are two totally different dynamics. Call response, question and answer. Call response, question and answer. Philosophy is a search for wisdom characterized by posing questions on the meaning of life and finding answers in them. And that's something that's very important to take note. The dynamics of the call response is not the same dynamic as the question and answer. But then we continue. The point of the encounter between philosophy and Christian faith is mission, is evangelization. But this was transformed into a question of clarifying the truth value of the gospel we preach, and therefore also the apologia of our hope. Needless to say, the converging point is a person, not just an idea, not just a concept, a person, Christ. Christ. And it is because of that that we go to Justin Martyr. Justin Martyr. Martyr is not his family name. It's worth saying. He was martyred. No, he's Saint Justin the Martyr. No? Uh, Justin Martyr, in his text, Dialogue with Trypho, a text that we will see in a bit, basically understood Christ as the Logos. Yes, the understanding of Christ as the Logos, while we read it almost directly from the Gospel of John, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word is God. The concept of Christ as the governing principle, reason, word, system, logic, order, and the like, uh, would be more clearly articulated in Justin Martyr. Justin Martyr, more or less 100 to 165 common era. No, we don't use Anno Domini anymore that much. In the scientific world, we use common era before common era, BCE and CE. Justin Martyr was a convert to Christianity. And for him, Christianity provided the answers to the questions that were raised by philosophy. But he clarifies that the ability to answer these questions is only possible when one submits himself to Christ. If one technically believes in Christ. So that it's very important to take note that Christ would play a very important role in the search of philosophy for philosophy, such that in the absence of Christ, the questions will remain to be totally unanswerable. But Christ manifests, reveals, like the phenomena of the Greek philosophers, things to humanity. Let's look at some of the sections of the text dialogue with Trifo. No, the dialogue can be downloaded in the list of texts in the learning management system. Let's begin with this one. Dialogue 2. I will tell you what seems to me, for philosophy is, in fact, the greatest possession and most honorable before God, to whom it leads us and alone commends us. And these are truly holy men who have bestowed attention on philosophy. Quite undeniably, from these starting lines alone, we can see Justin's positive appreciation of philosophy. First things first, he says the philosophy is a great possession. He doesn't only call it great, he calls it greatest possession. And take note of the superlatives, most honorable before God. And he says philosophy as a tool, possession, can lead us and commend us to God. And that's the reason why he says, only if people pay attention to philosophy. Only if people pay attention to philosophy. In Simone Weil's essay on attention, which you can find in the book Waiting for God, Simone Weil basically says that attention allows us to open ourselves to God. That the purpose of studying and all is in fact attention. I'd like to emphasize, I'd like us to look at that, and I'd like us to reflect more further on that. What does philosophy do to us? And how does philosophy lead us to commendation, commending ourselves to God? So Justin Martyr understands that the search for philosophy is in fact necessary in order for us to attain a full and happy life, such that one who doesn't do philosophy or one that does not take philosophy seriously, and I hope my seminarians and my students are in fact taking their philosophical discourse seriously, can only attain eudaimonia, happy life, with philosophy. And for that matter, because this happy life for Justin Martyr can only be done in relation to God, then you'd see already why in that experience of a full and happy life, God is also. The inevitability of finding God, the inevitability of arriving at God, these two will play a very important role in one's passion for God. So, philosophy then is the knowledge of that which really exists, of that which exists. Okay? And a clear perception, and it's a clear perception of the truth. And happiness is only a reward of such knowledge and wisdom. So let's look at this one from Dialogue 3. With C, therefore, we'll read there, philosophy is knowledge of that which really exists. No? Talagang totoo. Totoong totoo. In the words of Father Roque Ferriols. Ng talagang totoo. No? Filosofiya bilang kaalaman ng talagang totoo. Ng totoong totoo. Ng malinaw na pagdanas ng totoo. And therefore, here you recognize that philosophy is not simply about a concept. Philosophy is not simply about an idea. Philosophy is about the real, the really real. And therefore, and that's in that case, of the truth. And therefore, happiness becomes a consequence of such knowledge and wisdom. So the human soul, in that sense, cannot understand and reach wisdom except only if it was revealed by God. And here you see very strong resonances with the phenomena of the Greeks. In the phenomena of the Greeks, we see very clearly a certain form of passivity, no? Brought about by the revelation of the phenomena. It is in this context that we need to review more clearly what we mean by these phenomena. And in this case, this phenomena is a revelation of God, is revealed by God. That's what we need to pay attention to here. And this revelation of God will play a very important role in recognizing it's not dependent on us, but is dependent on others. That's why Dialogue 8 says, when he had spoken these and many other things, which there is no time for mentioning at present. See, remember the Jew Trypho is something, he's talking with the Jew Trypho, and he's mentioning about this guy who spoke to him many other things which he has not written, he says, he went away, bidding me attend to them. Pay attention at the details. That's what he was saying. But straight away, and I have not seen him since, but straight away, he says, a flame was kindled in my soul, and a love of the prophets and of those men who are friends of possessed me. And while revolving his words in my mind, I found this philosophy alone to be safe and profitable. Thus, for this reason, I am a philosopher. You might be wondering why there's a discussion page for those who are taking this course online. The question is, who was this guy who spoke to him these and many other things, and whom he never saw again? Read the rest of the dialogue with the Jew Thrifbo in order to discover who this guy is. But you are to submit your answers before midnight tonight for those who are taking this course. But I'm more interested with the descriptions that will follow. He says there, but straight away a flame was kindled in my soul, and a love for the prophets and of those men who are friends of prophets possessed me. And while revolving his words in my mind, I found this philosophy alone to be safe and profitable. Thus, and for this reason, I am a philosopher. Some of the things you have to pay attention to, that there is a flame kindling in her soul, and therefore a love for the prophets aroused in him, grew in him, possessed him, took over him. And while taking into consideration what has been said, he would later on say, philosophy alone is safe and profitable, and for this reason, he is a philosopher. No. If you pay attention at what is being said on these slides, you will tell me it sounded like the disciples on the road to Emmaus, how the road of the Emmaus awakened their sensibilities, awakened their souls, enlightened their minds, awakened their sensibilities. These are very, very important aspects to consider. And therefore, something that we need to pay attention to. It is the invitation. What you will have here is the invitation to believe in Christ that somehow enabled us to understand. And from this initial spark of faith, followed an articulation that uses reason. And I like to pay attention to that. First, there's an invitation to believe in Christ. And take note, it remains to be an invitation, not a command. And therefore, an openness to possibility. Christian faith never requires, but always invites, always asks you to consider. And from this initial spark of faith will follow an articulation that uses reason. Yes, an articulation that uses reason. If you pay attention to that, no, the believing comes in first, but the believing serves as an epistemological lens. And this epistemological lens allows us to see more clearly our faith, no? So as an epistemological lens, no, faith provides us with a lens to see reality. Without the lens, everything becomes blurred, everything becomes meaningless, everything becomes clueless, and it is the lenses that allows us to see more clearly, to see more sharply what faith shows. No? Uh, and therefore, reason aids in our believing. Going back to our slides. So, if therefore God proclaimed a new covenant which was to be instituted, and this for a light of the nations, we see and are persuaded that men approach God, leaving their idols and other unrighteousness through the name of him who was crucified, Jesus Christ, and abide by their confession even unto death, and maintain piety. That's something to pay attention to. No? If only I pay attention at this new covenant. I like the word covenant a lot. No? A covenant is like a relationship of trust. That's what a covenant is. No? And therefore, one that is constituted by an invitation, no? A response to a call. We are therefore, upon recognizing that, we see and are persuaded that men are changed. When you look at the cross, when you follow the invitation, you cannot not be changed. Men are changed when they approach God. And when that happens, we leave behind idols and unrighteousness through the name of him who was crucified. And therefore, abide, hold on to this confession, even unto death. Even unto death. And here, Justin Martyr refers to the many martyrdoms that happened in the Circus Maximus. Yes, we see the Colosseum still standing right now, but please take note, no martyrdoms was conducted in the Colosseum. The Colosseum was for gladiatorial shows, not for martyrdoms. The martyrdoms transpired in the Circus Maximus. And how many Christians gave their lives for that faith. It is faith, therefore, which sparks understanding. Yes, faith that sparks understanding. And this understanding does not deny what comes prior to faith. It does not deny philosophy. It does not deny reality, the really real. But instead, this faith brings to a greater sense and meaning all those who are in reference to the God who is believed. Although it is clear from the beginning that Christianity is not a philosophy like the others, it is still worth noting that this type of Christianity is still something we need to pay attention to, as it opens our sensibilities and our minds to what is really real. It allows us to see something. Our faith allows us to see something we would not have seen have we not believed. That's why it's not just a philosophy like all the others. Like philosophy, our faith is a way of life. Yes. But also, like all ways of life, our faith allows us to see something pure reason alone would not have seen nor caught. Please write a reflection paper that is due next week. And this is the reflection question. What conclusion can we draw from Justin's argument and his search for meaning, particularly about the relationship between reason and faith? You have the dialogue with Trifo available with you in the resources site, and you have 2 pages to write on this one. What conclusions can you draw from Justin's argument and his search for meaning? How was faith and meaning related to each other? To end, Justin Martyr's account of the Christian faith as a true philosophy shows how faith becomes a starting point. Yes, faith is a good starting point from which we interpret and make use of data for reason. However, he does not confine Christianity simply as a philosophy among others, understood by those who preceded the Christian faith. But more than that, he understands the relationship that moves between a contingent encounter, something that need not happen but could happen, to a choice that we make happen, which is present even in our lives. So, yes, it's true. No? Yes, it's true. It need not happen. But then it happened. And here we see the wisdom of the church fathers. Because the church fathers saw something that, yes, need not happen, should not have happened, but happened nevertheless, right? Happened nevertheless. And because it happened nevertheless, we now see the play of reason that is now a choice within the Christian church. Uh, that the church fathers decided on these, no? And that's what makes it a little bit more interesting, that the church fathers decided to to use philosophy, uh, to find philosophy as a necessary lens in order to understand their faith. Uh, so please read the text. That's very important. Um, and take into consideration also, first, the necessities of our faith. Okay? So, in the scriptures and in the early fathers, we have seen that the relationship and encounter between Christian faith and philosophy is a matter of contingence. It may not have happened, but due to the missionary zeal of St. Paul and the prevailing culture in the cities surrounding Israel, it happened. In the same way, Justin Martyr's account of Christian faith as a true philosophy shows how faith becomes a starting point from which we interpret and make use of the data of reason. However, he does not confine Christianity as a philosophy among others, understood by those who preceded the Christian faith. But also more interestingly, we can look into the Christological councils who have not only shown the fact that there is a demand to clarify and answer the questions that arise from this encounter, but also that the Christian faith values rational discourse and thinking as a means to evangelize, which in a way grounds the necessity to explain elements of our faith. Here, we actually see, for example, in the Council of Nicaea, a term which is never biblical but was used by the church fathers to speak about the nature of Christ. Homo oikos. It is a very interesting concept, consubstantial with the Father. But what does consubstantial with the Father means? That is also something we need to pay attention to. Okay? So, so you have tasks to work on. And again, what conclusions can be drawn from St. Justin's argument and his search for meaning? We can expound it more further, no? What does it mean for us who search for the meaning of life and believe that it is found in Christ? Here, we need to pay attention at the reality of the encounter, of the contingent reality of the encounter, but also on how that contingent reality became a necessity. No? What happened, why it became a necessity. We move now to the Christological councils. And it's very important to pay attention at the Christological councils because this will allow us to see forward directions where we are. No? So allow me to share my slides. So Christianity and philosophy needs to be understood vis-a-vis the search for truth and meaning. The search for truth and meaning. From contingency to destiny, from encounter to assimilation. And this leads us to the Christological councils, as I've said. The ontological identity of Jesus Christ came out of a need to articulate the Christian faith as distinct from other strands. Why are these important? Our understanding of Jesus' identity has consequences in our understanding of salvation. But if you're interested in this topic, because this is already a very long recording, please subscribe, click like or subscribe to this channel, Samo't sa Simula, and please share in your social media to keep this channel ongoing. I'll upload this one as a secondary slide, as a second lecture. Thank you very much for listening.